And we are here at Knobcon 19 with Bradford Kinney from Warm Star Electronics. Hey Bradford, it's nice to see you. We haven't talked before.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me, Nicholas.
Of course. Can you show us your product range?
Absolutely. So my two products that are currently available are both complex utilities, because one of my major missions is to help everyone build the backbone of their modular systems. I think that we can be more creative with our utilities and how signals flow through our systems. So my first product is the Benz. It's a voltage-controlled averaging matrix, a voltage manipulator. You could think of it as a voltage-controlled bleed module. You have 4 channels and 6 voltage controls of the crossovers between those 4 channels.
Okay.
And those voltage controls allow you to cross those channels into each other. So it's really useful for taking a few control voltages and turning them into a bunch of more complex control voltages to go throughout your system. A simple example of that would be if you send an LFO just into this A-B control in the middle.
Yep.
You got the A channel here, B channel here, you have an attenuator for each of them. If you set A low and B high, you can see that they are rising and falling from those LEDs. And when this LFO rises, since A is at 0 volts and B is at, say, 6,
Yep.
as that LFO rises, the high one falls and the low one rises. So already from this one LFO in, you have a signal coming out of the A output that is similar to that LFO, rises when it rises. You have a signal coming out of B that is the inverse phase. It falls when this LFO rises because B is getting pulled down toward the A value as A gets pulled up toward B.
Right.
You also have an inverse out for each of those. So from this one LFO, you have 4 outputs, and it is in a certain way a quad reflection of this single LFO that you could send to multiple locations and that you could manipulate the range of by moving these 2 knobs.
Yeah, the attenuation is the nice part. You know, what I really like about this is the notion of being able to have signals that are related to each other musically, but that are not the same. And that'll give you a lot more bang for your buck in terms of different voices doing different things that are related.
That's exactly right. I also should have mentioned the inputs of each channel are normaled to 10 volts. So that's how we have values coming out of these that we can manipulate this way, even though we're not providing any input at all.
Yep.
So then if you take additional modulation, you modulate across the BC axis, across the AC axis.
Yep.
Now you already, or even just say BC, you now have 2 LFOs going into it, crossing A into B, crossing B into C. You have 3 different values there. From these 2 pieces of simple modulation, you now have 6 more complex outputs from A, B, and C out, and their inverses, all of which are combinations of these 2 LFOs, all of which are more complex than these 2 LFOs in the way that a VCA would allow you to be. But instead of getting 1 output the way you would from a VCA, you have 6 different ones, and you have 3 different abilities to manipulate the properties of what you're getting out of that. You add some more axes to that, and you can get some really very complex wiggles from a relatively small number of inputs and have a much larger number of outputs and have an easy 4-knob control surface for manipulating what you're getting there. So it makes a really nice modulation heart for your patch. You can patch these out to, all over your rig, and then have a place where you can adjust one thing and it'll change a lot of waves going to a lot of places. It makes a really nice central intersection for control voltage in your system.
Super useful. That is just awesome.
Thank you very much.
I really, really like that. What else do you have to show us?
My second module, and my other one that's currently commercially available, is the Fragment. It is also a utility module, and it's a multi-utility mostly for mixing and multing that is based on a dual downward cascade. So you can see over here on this one that's less patched that we have 2 columns, input column and output column, and they both cascade downward in 2 different ways. The in cascades down in copies, and the out cascades down in mixing. So you can break this into smaller functions based entirely on how you patch it. So looking back over here, we've got these 3 coming in, we've got these 2 outputs empty, and then this one is patched. So these outputs waterfall down to here, and this has formed a 3-channel mixer. Right below it, We've got 2 in and 1 out. This is a separate 2-channel mixer. These are independent from each other, and they're independent entirely based on how it's patched.
Is that because as soon as you plug something into the output, that breaks the normal to the stuff underneath it?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And as soon as you plug something into the input, it breaks the normal of things getting copied downward.
I see.
So the thing that is not patched here, but I could do an example over here, is if this was an input and we had a couple of outputs happening starting at that and moving downward, as many as you wanted, this would be a buffered multiple starting with this in and then copies going down these inputs and coming over to these outputs. So you have a buffered multiple with an attenuator for every one of those sends.
Super useful.
And you can distribute the module among these features as you need. You have 9 rows, and you could make several mixers, you could make several multiples, you could make one 9-channel mixer. You can also use an individual row as just a straight attenuator, which is what's happening at the top here. This is just an attenuator, and this is an attenuator with these 2 knobs attenuating those signals going across.
What a flexible mixer, and it's useful for both audio rates and control voltage, correct?
It is. And another trick that you can do is if you go into one channel, out of the channel below it, or a channel below it, and patch nothing else, you've made 2 copies of this signal, and then summed them over here. So what'll come out of here is a double amplitude copy of what's going into there.
Wow.
So you can also use it for signal amplitude multiplication. There's not a lot of true amplification in Euro. So this is useful for getting external signals up to modular level. It's useful for getting a 5-volt modulation up to 10 volts for a module that calls for that. Yeah, a lot of versatility.
And the other thing that I'd like to point out that I really like for live performance is the fact that all of the knobs are on the left and all of the jacks are on the right, meaning you have enough room to be able to get in there and get the knobs without them being covered by cables during live performance. So this would take the place of about 3 or 4 different modules in my live rig right now. That's very, very cool.
Thank you. I often hear from people that they have a full rack and they're looking at modules and thinking, oh, but I don't have room. And then they see this one and they say, well, that makes room.
Right.
I can put this in, pull 3 other things out, and then...
I would agree. I would agree. So what are you demoing here, or what are you previewing here that isn't ready yet?
So this is my new module, Orbit. It is my first collaboration with All Right Devices, who are also an Austin, Texas company. And it has been a lot of fun working with Tyler on this module. It's a triple entangled modulation source and trigger source. So you have just one ping input, and that input goes to all 3 of these multiplication division points. It can either go directly to all of them, or it can go to the first one and have that ping the second 2, or it can have the first ping the second ping the third in a cascade. They go up to multiplied by 10 and divided by 10. And they each generate an output wave, an output function. So you have 3 essentially clockable LFOs or envelopes coming out of it. They also each generate a trigger each cycle. This one generates an end of cycle trigger, and these 2 generate end of attack triggers. And you have an output for each of those triggers.
Wow.
So it's very useful for generating polyrhythms, complex rhythms of all kinds.
Oh yeah.
And you start self-patching it, you can get into these crazy trigger bursts and IDM strangeness and very complex rhythms. You also, of course, have voltage control over every knob, and it also works at audio rate. So I actually have a little sound demonstration ready here.
Let's hear it.
It's a little bit of a mess. So what we have here is these rhythms of the percussion are being generated from this orbit over here, and actually all of this audio is the sound of this orbit modulating a droning oscillator.
Wow.
Because, as you may know, whole number multiples of a frequency are harmonics. So you can use this to generate 3 different harmonics over an oscillator, and of course if you move that oscillator, all of this tracks with it.
Wow.
So you can essentially use this at audio rate to make a harmonic chord over a single oscillator, and to modulate with control voltage the content of that chord, which is what's happening here. All of the movement of pitch that you hear is happening because modulation is going into the Benz, which is modulating the values of these 3 multipliers, which is moving these up and down. There's no sequence at all.
Right. Very, very cool. Bradford, when is that? When is the Orbit module going to be ready?
The target release date is Halloween, but knowing module development, that is a fingers crossed situation.
I understand. That's wonderful. Bradford Kinney, Warmstar Electronics, where can people buy your modules?
They can buy them at my website, warmstarelectronics.com. They can buy them at Switched On in Austin, at Perfect Circuit in Burbank,
Cool.
at Midwest Modular, many other places.
Well, I'll just have to go over to Perfect Circuit. I'm a Burbank guy, so that's my hometown.
I love that store.
I do too.
They have been so supportive of me since the very beginning, and I am so grateful for it.
Well, I want to congratulate you. These are 3 modules that I have not seen before, and I think they're extremely useful and they're really important, and I can hardly wait to get this up for people to find out more about it.
Thank you. I really appreciate you talking to me about them.
Have a great day.
Thanks.